For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But for the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away, and cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I think of this as we are approaching our winter months. It's this idea of abundance, something that we've been talking about often at the church these days, of how can we create a program that facilitates abundance for communities for whom it has been forbidden, for those who have been excluded. We live in a system that creates an artificial scarcity. This is a common knowledge for our people, our congregation, that here in Trinity Square, the trappings of wealth are present all around us, and yet completely out of reach for so many. So we look to that, and that through our privilege and position in society, we may be mediating forces of wealth and poverty to redraw the line of have and have not through acts of gathering and redistribution, which is not far off from the reading today as work that is lauded by our Master. Yet our working meaning of abundance seems to be different than what Matthew is referring to in his telling of the parable of talents. There is a subtext to this notion of being given more, that as God sees it, this abundance is not a good thing, and it does not bring our Creator closer to us. That according to Jesus, that comes in our desolation, that it is derived from the self-emptying nature of suffering. Our riches come from our endurance of that suffering throughout the ages. In the Hindu devotional text of Bhagavad Gita, this is referred to as Vishnu Maya, or the veil of Maya, illusion. When Lord Vishnu casts a net of sleep over all of creation, obscuring what is knowledge and what is ignorance, as he reorders our earth. Through deep yogic practice, this practice of self-emptying, we lift this veil of illusion and awaken to see the reality of our spirit, the eternal part of us as it's connected to God. Yes, agreed, Matthew, we could all use to lift this veil. It's the greatest talent, so to speak, to be blessed by suffering, seemingly for no reason whatsoever, as a divine gift, to understand fully this curse of abundance. And there are traces of this all over Trinity Square. I would see them when I began my work here at Holy Trinity, these little gathered elements of colorful children's blankets tied with electrical cord to make small shelters, the pilings of discarded clothing from high-end stores taken carefully from their dumpsters, sorted, discarded, left to dissolve, the collections of soiled and used ephemera from H&M and Holt's, Club Monaco, and so on, the hoardings that resemble this division, unneeded, sanctioned for disposal, ready to be collected by those who cannot reach into our abundance, reaching for any tiny semblance of the life that God has afforded to us and not to them. They were all so beautiful to me at this time, and I guess I just didn't fully understand the symbolism. I would photograph them as I thought that they might have been left by some magical person who had placed them there to create a narrative of a life that I would not and could not know, a journey into a mystical world. And then shortly into my time here, I began receiving emails about these unique gleanings, these piles, creations, imitations of wealth, from the Parks Department, CC the Business Improvement Area, BCC the developer or the mall. Excuse me, but you have 24 hours to remove this from your area. Excuse me, but you're violating a permit. Excuse me, but this does not belong here. Please forbid it. Telling, not asking, that this intrusion, this line crossing, must be removed from sight. You're breaking the illusion here. And then came the banks and the companies and the lawyers that dutifully bring their loose ends to the square, the leftovers of the lives gathered by group text. Hey, we're doing an office drive to help the needy. Are you in? To offer ends of their catered lunches, the no longer needed jackets, the feel-good volunteerism followed by a photo shoot. And now I'm not trying to be cynical here. We're talking about charity, and it's important. It's important that they come. They should come. It's important that this is provided, that people need it. It's important to their spirits, and it's important to us. We're the mediators, the intermediaries of wealth, benefiting from this brand awareness of a giving and generous heart. But what for the others, destined only to receive, the last coordinate of a journey of capital production? In abusive relationship cycles, there's what's called the giving flowers moment, in which the abuser extends a token of remorse for what they have done to cause hurt, which is a manipulative act to change the perception of the abuse. There is no choice but to take it, because if you are in an abusive relationship, the cost of not making nice is often far greater than accepting the fate of the abuse cycle. The giving act doesn't repair the harm. It doesn't even address it. It doesn't remedy the suffering. It's solely important for the abuser because it is a recognition of their own woundedness and a plea to the victim for help, to return them to a state of mind in which they have done no wrong, returning to that peace and pleasure. In turn, the victim is asked to continue emptying themselves of feelings of hurt, of needed safety, and of dignity. Take away the human, take away the self. In spring before COVID, we were grappling with this, two sides of a coin, totally unbalanced, abundance and suffering. Abundance had been promoting a life of exclusivity and privilege as the pinnacle of being, raising their towers far into the sky to reach the heavens in praise of these gifts the Master has bestowed. Suffering to them became a physical manifestation of the antithesis of a life of abundance. They poxed the world with the reminders of displeasure. Abundance worked to blot out suffering through hiding it away, under bridges, in alleyways, warehousing suffering in shelters and prisons. Abundance became an all-possessing goal with a strict social order that governed it, gathering and consuming all things as if they were given just for you. And so abundance went forth, reaping where they did not sow, and gathering where they scattered no seed. We saw this as every inch and every ounce and everything was surrendered into abundance, until all that was left was the small plot of beneath the feet of the suffering, to which abundance said, "This too belongs to us," smearing those who refused as slothful and wicked in their way, garnered by the consequence of their choices. They yelled it from the tops of their towers that these despicable people know that we reap and we do not sow, and yet they choose to do no different. If they do not produce for us, they should pay interest for what they have been given. And so that through all that was at their disposal, they took what was left away, closing the doors of the needle exchange, provoke an overdose crisis, defund mental health services, shut the doors to the bathrooms, to the lobbies, to the waiting rooms, revitalize this corner, hostile architecture, bar the benches, bar the stairwells, ban them from drop-ins, the shelters, the parks, take away the parks, until there is nothing left. This is how it happened in Toronto, but it was all across this land it was happening too. The pipelines are going in, the oil is coming out, the subdivision is being built, the diamond mines flood the town, agribusiness destroy the fields, each reaping 5 more talents for the master. Those in the way are slandered, harassed, imprisoned, murdered, the cost of abundance, and all that is returned to the earth. We are in a time of reckoning with this system. We can see its absurdity, its lack of humility, its indiscretions. It's vivid. Christ through Matthew speaks to its hypocrisy. But because of the conditioning we have received under a lifetime of capitalism, the gospel today conjures an immediate reaction that Christ is describing the acts of God in referring to the master. But Christ finds God in the third slave, who accepts suffering in the refusal to act foolishly with resources, to treasure them instead of and know their value. They are ripped out from under him as he is scourged, as Christ is scourged, with Christ. We are reckoning with this system, and Christ calls us to lift this veil of Maya, to not just refuse a system where the master chooses which of his slaves receive benefit, who receives abundance and who is excluded, but with the system that upholds the master at all. No longer can we see God in this master and his choices of who to privilege and who to punish. No longer can we see God in the trappings of patriarchy, of capitalism, of the state. No longer can we see God when the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. No longer does this bring God closer to us, and no longer should we accept this narrative. This is what Christ calls us through Matthew, to see the story for what it is, painful to our spirits, painful to the lands, painful to God. The task of self-emptying asks us to remove the conditioning of a system in which the exclusion zones have grown so large and overwhelming that they can no longer hold the weight of our dreams and desires. And these are dreams that we celebrate here at Holy Trinity, that we're known for. And this is what COVID has given us the opportunity to renew. A community that finds abundance through the wealth of our spirits and self-emptying of the things that are holding us back from truly living into who we are and into relationship with one another. We are fostering a community that is based on participation and cooperation. We are looking to a future that, beginning with us, the divide is bridged, that we see the gifts in each person and put them to use for the benefit of the whole. So when COVID hit, we were able to deploy ourselves from this value statement, to be radical in our approach, to be brave, to be open-minded, to bring together lots of different people across cultures and faiths, to do what was required of us as a community together and put our collective needs at the center. The need for safety, for care, for place, for meaning. These are essentials to all of us. And from that first action of centering our needs together, so much was able to flourish. We were there to be open, to take it seriously, to serve food, to give space, to push the city, to resist evictions, to stand against the violence of policing, to offer testing, to supply outreach groups, to work with the doctors and the nurses, to hold the memorials, to lift up the youth, to hold the mothers who give birth, to heal wounds, to bring forth art and life. And through this countless people have found safety, care, place, and meaning. Which is great, and it sounds great, right? Us fully living into who we are, but still there is more to this story that I want to tell you. I want to tell you about a man named Dave Recollet. Dave is the founder of the Native Wishing Well, who is one of our partners in outreach at Trinity Square. They provide 24/7 crisis mediation, first aid, overdose response, support with food, clothing, survival equipment 24 hours a day. Which means that if you are someone in any kind of crisis and you find your way to Trinity Square at any time of day or night, there will be someone here to support you in whatever situation you are going through, to calm you down and find you a place to be in this dangerous world. This is a groundbreaking initiative that brings needed services to people on their terms in their context. Dave's background is in paramedicine, and he was a fly-in first responder in northern Indigenous communities for many years. He's also a hereditary chief in his home community of Whitefish River First Nation, who decided that although this was his calling, he was needed in Toronto to support his people here. So he created this program that is 100% Indigenous-led and that, as such, bring elements of traditional knowledge, bushcraft, and cultural support to those in need in very practical ways. I look at this as a monumental success of our work and our partnerships during this time, that we've been able to work alongside one another, interculturally, interfaith, interpurpose. This is something that we should have supported a long time ago. And it's not like Dave is even an unfamiliar face to us. He has lived in Trinity Square for almost 20 years. Up until COVID hit, Dave slept where he could, out of the way, with whatever he could. His presence was easily overlooked, pushed out of this place or that, and that he had to navigate the constant flux of being moved along. This impermanence is not an easy feat, and there's often some complicating factors. He lives with brain cancer that causes memory loss, and it is occasionally debilitating. He does his chemo treatment in the back entrance of St. Michael's, where he meets his doctor and then recovers wherever he can. This is one more challenge after he survived the violence of the church and the state. He survived the intrusion of the industry in northern communities, and he survived the streets. I would be wrong to say this is something that I could bear. It sounds like the darkest place. It sounds like a place of weeping and gnawing of teeth. For the past 7 months, Dave has lived in front of the church in a tent, and this has afforded him a tiny bit of permanence and space of his own. Let's remember that only 7 months ago, this wouldn't have been possible. He would have been moved out of, and that tent and all of his possessions would have been destroyed. But COVID altered that narrative. Our downtown was discarded and desolate, no longer able to be reaped for profit of the master. All things closed and nowhere to go. So Dave pitched a tent and lived in Trinity Square, his home. We got to know each other better after months of working to support a growing encampment community. He would help to clean up, tidy the park, help with this or that, or keep things running smoothly. He was an attentive host to guests in his house, making sure that each person was getting what they needed, occasionally advocating for this person or that person, diffusing this conflict or that. Then one day he came to ask for a crate of water, letting me know he wanted to help people who were thirsty on the street when we were not around. And so the wishing well began. Water, coffee, cigarettes, smudge, a listening ear, a parental presence, a voice of reason and care. Slowly more people joined him, offering what they could, sharing what they could, whatever they could do to help others feel stable, to come out of the tumult of street life for a minute or an hour or a day. People began to change. They became more familiar, more cooperative. People began to take up their space, to plant their talents in the ground and treasure what they could offer as their gift to the world. As Dave puts it, people who would never talk to each other are talking to each other now, and we are becoming a family together. A big family that cares about each other. And like that, it became a movement all around us. Abundance is being created. The fibers of connection between us, the care for one another, the wealth of our spirits. So I tell this story with Dave's permission to illustrate his success and ours. I asked him, what would you like people to take away from this? And he said, tell them not to forget about us down here. Thanks be to our Creator who gives us the bounty of life. Thanks be to the spirits that govern our world. Thanks be to the earth and to the sky and to all things, for we are blessed.